Welcome to CosmoFactory, a podcast by Cosmoprof Worldwide Bologna, where we explore the entire cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance industry supply chain. I'm your host, Deanna Utrusky, and here at CosmoFactory, we look beyond the trends to discover the ideas, initiatives, and innovations that are truly advancing beauty. Let's get started. This episode is about regenerative skincare and ethical sourcing. It's about building a brand around a novel ingredient technology, about the importance of supply chain partnerships, and much more. Joining me today on the CosmoFactory podcast is Alec Batis, CEO and co-founder of Sweet Chemistry Skincare. Welcome.
Hi, Deanna. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's really great to be able to talk to you and find out more about the industry, and thank you for giving me a chance to talk about, Sweet Chemistry.
Of course, no, very glad that you could be here. In our industry today, I think I would say that we're hearing about two types of regenerative beauty. There are skincare technologies that promise to help generate fully vital skin cells and skin tissue by basically stimulating the natural growth and remodeling mechanisms of our skin. And then there are also regenerative agriculture or aquaculture practices being used to source cosmetic and personal care ingredients. As I understand it, Sweet Chemistry is a brand that can talk about both. But Alec, I'm hoping that our conversation will focus more on skincare than on agriculture. I'm hoping to start off here. You can just tell me what regenerative skincare means at Sweet Chemistry.
So you would think that regenerative skincare would just be about the ingredient that we're about to talk about,
Yeah.
biotechnology, because usually that's what that word is referred to, and especially in this desire to be science-backed, quote unquote. That's the sort of direction people talk about. But for Sweet Chemistry, it's a little bit more than that. Sweet Chemistry, obviously the word chemistry is all about the science of things. And that has a lot to do with the brand. But then there's also the part about Sweet Chemistry that's about the connection between human beings. So some of us that have been in the industry a long time, we're just, wanting to sort of explore past the physical when it comes to beauty, because we've just done the physical part so long. And some of us feel a little bit guilty about focusing on that so much. So when we think regenerative, we think we kind of keep to these North Stars, so to speak, or some people call them pillars, but I prefer North Stars.
Yes.
And there's three things. One is innovation. Innovation because I don't know, it's just so interesting.
Right.
And innovation is interesting. It keeps the world go round, makes the world go round. It makes the world better. It inspires people. And that is the number one sort of North Star for us. So when it comes to innovation, it's all about, what is that next technology that's going to taking care of the skin to the next level, right? What's going to expand that? And then there's integrity. And that is our second sort of North Star. And, regenerative, this concept of regenerative in terms of integrity is the formulation integrity. So, as you know, a long time ago, I was a chemist for some of the majors, and formulating in a more modern way with a little bit more integrity, that to me, creating formulas that have more substance, that to me is regenerative. When you're using functional levels instead of marketing levels, that to me is going to be more regenerative. When you have, whether you believe chamomile extract is soothing or not, if you have 0.01 versus 1, it's a world of different, right? A world of difference. So to me, that's regenerative. And then the last thing is what we call healing. So yes, the magekines we're about to speak of in medicine, they're being used in many ways to heal, right? Whether it's healing lung tissue, whether it's taking decellularized extracellular matrix and making in vitro assays for disease, understanding of disease, and also drug testing. All those things are incredible for mankind and the future of it. our goal with, being regenerative in terms of healing is not just in terms of the physical skin and the body, but it's also kind of moving the conversation of what beauty is, especially for the younger generations, and finding ways to talk about beauty in more ways than just looking good.
That's a delightfully comprehensive view of regenerative beauty. No, and it's interesting. I certainly hear, other brands and leaders mirroring your comments on healing, where folks are thinking very more holistically and much more about yeah, the care of the person. And certainly your other concepts there resonate as well. You touched on the matrixinds. I'm hoping you can talk a bit about the ingredient technology that you've borrowed from regenerative medicine directly, as well as about your relationship with this company called Xylix Bio. What's going on there?
Yes. So Xylix Bio, I met a few years ago. So I met them thinking that they might be a client. So I went out to the lab in Brooklyn. It's at SUNY Downstate Medical Center. And I walked in and I was walking down the hall and there's like the AIDS vaccine lab on the left,
Hmm.
stuff like that. And then I got to the Xylix lab and then I sat down with Dr. John O'Neill, who's incredibly passionate and charming and has a mission in life to solve this issue of fibrotic tissue of different organs because of personal reasons. And so he started Xylix Bio. He came out of the Laboratory for Stem Cell and Tissue Engineering from out of Columbia University. And his focus is extracellular matrix. And usually there's all this talk about stem cell, stem cell, stem cell. And he was like, oh, yeah, I know stem cells are the popular kids, but we're really focused on the stuff that surrounds these cells and sustains their life. They take ECM of some seven, I think about seven organs, the heart, bone, intestine, kidney, skin, just skin just as one other. It's not the largest organ. Like the skin for them doesn't stand out in any way. It's just one of. And the liver and lungs, so seven, and then and then they also do a fibrotic tissue of each one of those as well. And they basically take the ECM from deceased organs that they obtain, and then they hydrolyze it enzymatically down into these peptides or polypeptides or ECM hydrogels. And then they sell that to pharma and to research.
As I understand it, what you've borrowed from Xylix Bio, then we can think of it as hydrolyzed cow bone extract. And what you're doing with it in the skincare space, then you're working with it as what I would describe as a novel and proprietary ingredient. And you do have exclusive license in the cosmetics industry. Can you talk a little bit about the ingredient's functionality?
Basically, ECM, when it's broken down into the polypeptides, those polypeptides provide signals, right? Signaling to the cells to regenerate, to repair, etc. The interesting thing about this is that they have reduced, hydrolyzed the ECM into hundreds. I think they've mapped out about 315 so far.
Okay.
Polypeptides within the actual ECM. So it's, in a way, they haven't created anything. They've just taken it from what exists already.
Yeah.
Instead of damaging the skin to get the peptides to regenerate this sort of a scar tissue, why not sort of these, basically what this is when they hydrolyze enzymatically the ECM, they're doing the damage at that point to get the peptides. And then you can just let the peptides regenerate the skin so that you'll obtain functioning, living tissue instead.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Before I get to my next question, I'm going to take just a minute to share some quick notes on what's happening in the regenerative skincare space, because there's a lot going on. Regenerative skincare benefits are not new, but I would say that the topic, as your comments have suggested, Alec, are getting a lot more sophisticated. As an area of focus, longevity has become increasingly relevant for cosmetic science and skincare professionals over the past few years. We're starting to hear about concepts like skin vitality. I've heard the term reverse aging in some presentations. Earlier this year at Cosmoprof North America in Las Vegas, I was introduced to a new brand called NR Lab that's working with nicotinamide riboside that can replenish NAD+, which is a coenzyme necessary for cell metabolism. I know the Estee Lauder companies have been researching epigenetics and sirtuins for over 15 years now. They've presented and published on the topic and even developed their own ingredient technology around that longevity research. As an example from the ingredient space, the ingredient maker Mibel Biochemistry has a skincare ingredient in its portfolio called Rejuvenad. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but hopefully the team there at Mibel will forgive me. Yeah, that ingredient is backed by data showing that it boosts NAD+ levels and makes the skin appear 8 years younger. And the US-based biotech research company Carmel Corporation has been in the news quite a bit this summer. That company, now led by Kendra Bracken Ferguson, is leveraging secretomics. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways, but this is basically the study of proteins secreted by a cell or tissue for regenerative skincare applications. There's research going on for other applications as well in the medical space, as you can imagine. But there is a lot going on with regenerative skincare. Those are just some of the highlights. I run through those notes just to put our conversation, I think, in a bit more context. I'm curious about some of your supply chain partnerships. How did you find manufacturers who would work with a novel ingredient? What was that process like?
When we met with the contract manufacturers, I knew right away that there's no way I could be able to go to sort of any of the smaller, or I shouldn't say smaller, but less advanced CMs. I went to some of the ones that really had more robust R&D, more robust regulatory. So, and I knew what that would mean is that we had to jump through a lot of hoops, right? In terms of regulatory, but I knew, first of all, that Xylix had the ability to do that, and get what was needful, right? It wasn't me doing it. I didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
Xylix was able to come up with everything that was required. And then it has been a challenge, like working with this ingredient, how do we provide the ingredient, right? How do we provide it for the water soluble, for, emulsions? How do we provide it for anhydrous systems? In the future, how are we going to provide it for powder? Like, so all that is, and that's something that, the CM labs don't focus on. And I'm putting the word out too, because to just like I was a bench chemist in the early 90s, so
Yeah.
I've lost pretty much everything by this point. But to find those that really do our part of development is kind of also what we are looking for, because right now we're doing the best we can to provide the materials in various forms for various products, but it will Xylix is not an expert in cosmetic science either, right?
Right, right.
So it is a challenge. Luckily, we've been lucky so far. In the oil serum, we've had to kind of suspend the peptide,
Okay.
only because we didn't want water in
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And so, we just kind of, but we wanted the peptide in there so badly, I think just for personal reasons, honestly. So we do, but that'll evolve, right?
Hmm.
That'll evolve. That formula will become more sophisticated. I'm currently working with a couple of potential labs to help, improve the suspension.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, interesting. Lots of challenges for your brand to overcome for sure. And I think you told me in an earlier conversation that the ingredient is currently produced in that lab that you visited in Brooklyn, New York. But as the brand grows and, has international presence, you'll likely want to produce it in other locations. How are you searching for an ingredient production partner? What sort of criteria do you have for that partnership?
I mean, interesting you should mention that, because Alex, we just went to Cosmoprof in Vegas to start having the conversations,
Okay.
looking for different CMs to be able to help with that process, but at the same time, be able, it took $10 million in 10 of NIH government funding in 10 years to actually develop these
Mhm.
matrikines, because they're utilized in both, primarily for medicine. So the SOP to produce them is quite complex. I've never seen it myself.
Sure.
So yes, the search is on for the sort of future global expansion.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely another interesting challenge. Maybe not that common. But while we're thinking about supply chain partners, I'd like to talk a bit about packaging. If I can summarize it, and please correct me if you don't like this, I would say that you've opted for packaging that has a sustainability story, but also that fits into the luxury market tier. Would you agree with that? And help us understand your packaging for folks who haven't really looked at the Sweet Chemistry brand.
Yes, I would agree with that. It just so happened that yes, the glass happens to be made in Italy. So that right there is like prestigious. But but the real focus was number one, airless. People say, "Oh, it's so small. How come you don't give as much product as everyone else? You're giving like half what everyone else is giving, but it's the same volume."
Yeah, yeah.
But there's no size impression,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because these days, if you're talking sustainability, like why are we talking size impression anymore? I just don't
Hmm.
get it. And then the other part is the glass itself. So what we did specifically is made sure that the glass was less weight than the
Hmm.
plastic.
Hmm.
So therefore, in production, less carbon emission. And then for this particular one, the choice was shipping from Italy or shipping from Europe to the East Coast where
Yes.
we produce versus shipping from China to the West Coast and then trucking it all the way across the country
Hmm.
here. So that sort of freight, that shipping component. So all things said and done, we've gotten a bunch of great things. Number one is no potential leaching of plastic components when, into plastic chemicals into the product. Not that I'm fear mongering about it, but I just would rather not if I could not, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because they are talking about some of the release of these chemicals into product as it sits there for God knows how long.
Okay.
So the glass itself, and then the glass being 90, it's 90, we've weighed it. The plastic is only in the pump and it's 14 grams versus sort of an average of 140 grams of plastic for most airless
Hmm.
jars or bottles. So that's 90% less plastic with every purchase. And to me,
Yeah.
that I don't know, that feels good. And then the glass, even the glass itself is so light and unfortunately no size impression. So even the throwing the glass out seems okay, less than some huge glass heavy, packaging.
Right, right.
And then the goal is, luckily, they've the technology of this airless, they've done it in the screw in instead
Okay.
of the snap on, right? Which
Yes.
for what for many years I'd be like, no, snap on only because the screw, you can like you could loosen it or something like that. So it was only, but then I realized, well, okay, just people just need to remember not to unscrew it. Like you just need to keep it tight. So
Right,
if you
right.
don't, it's your fault. Sorry. And just, that's just it. But this way, the goal in the future with future runs is to just be able to replace the bottom glass part
Right, right.
maybe 4 times a year, like every
Hmm.
2 or 3 months.
Hmm.
This way, the objective is the only sort of plastic that you will put out into the world is one tiny pump and
Right,
overcap
right, right,
per
right.
year per 4 to 6 purchases.
Hmm. Hmm.
And to me, that's just sounds more this whole concept of greenwashing. I feel like, okay, this is something that is actually making progress. It costs a fortune,
Yeah, yeah.
but to me, it's worth it.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to hear. Thank you for all of that. Tell us a little bit about some of the ingredients in your formula, beyond your hero ingredient and how you're sourcing them.
Yes. So the botanicals in terms of anti-inflammatories, antioxidants, right? Usually that's for me kind of why I go down that way. And in terms of emolliency as well. And there's the oil soluble antioxidants, the water soluble, the enzymatic, the enzymatic antioxidants, which don't usually end up being botanicals for the most part. But having that sort of variety. But when I was looking at the botanicals, number one, it was okay, which ones are the least allergenic?
Mm.
Even chamomile, I decided for the extract not to include it because 25% of Americans or people are allergic to ragweed, have ragweed allergies, and the tingling part, to me, I'm not into the tingling part saying it works. It's irritation, right? And to me, irritation and the skin barrier don't really go well together in the long run. So I purposely tried to look for the ones that really did have the least allergen contact dermatitis
Sure.
profile. So ones like the red raspberry seed, the pomegranate, and lovely ones like jojoba, the Rosa rubinegosa versus the canina,
Mhm.
because of sort of more evidence about sort of the vitamin A and help with skin turnover. Half of it even I don't know. Is this really doing something? However, when you look at the constituents of these things, and if you keep them intact within the glass, airless, and then making sure they're all organic pest, they're all grown in with organic farming. That's what was a requirement for
Mhm.
us.
Okay.
We know that there's still use of pesticide of some sort, right? Even on the organic farming, but it's just much more well thought out in terms of the environment, in terms of the farmers themselves. As I progress, I'm actually going to be sort of moving suppliers for different ingredients to the point where our blog is hopefully, I have no bandwidth for this right now, but at September 1, I'll be ending my first full-time job and working on this full-time
Yes.
September 1. So a lot of that will be about like, okay, each ingredient, like who is really behind it? I know some of the brands do that, and I've always thought that was like, yeah, you really are knowing what's in your product. And that's got to be, I should feel bad that I don't know more about each supplier currently. Just
Mhm.
the requirement by the CM was met, right? With the
Yes. Yes.
words. And um, I feel like it's important, and I've seen other brands do this, and I will too. And then just make sure that every single ingredient in there is understand exactly where it's coming from and
Mhm.
know the people behind it as well. And that's
Yeah.
kind of an enjoyable part of the process.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about sort of the ownership of transparency, but as you're saying too, it can be quite enjoyable. You're getting to learn even more about how your
Yeah.
products are made and what's indeed in them.
Yes, I think you've been, you introduced me, I think through one of your stories I'd read about macro oceans,
Yes, yes.
and they're now, I think, they're working with, they got distribution through
Yes, they're working with OO Organics now.
organics,
Hmm.
and gay at or organics is like, when I've talked to her and about, her working with macro oceans, and as you know, I'm very interested in working something with their ingredient as
Uh-huh.
well, because I think it's just so interesting besides the benefit of the ingredient. But then she happens to sort of have really some good relationships with who she buys from.
Mhm.
So as I'm going deeper into the industry again, to be able to learn more about where all these things are coming from, how they're actually done, go there, right?
Mhm.
I've
Mhm.
done that in another industry with apparel and cotton
Sure.
farming, as I've talked about.
Hmm.
But that's definitely a very important part, and will progress over time. I have a feeling that formulas will just keep evolving
Yeah.
and getting better and better.
Well, Alec, I thank you for a very compelling conversation today. I'm so glad you could join me on the CosmoFactory podcast.
Thank you, Deanna. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you find the CosmoFactory podcast useful, Please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts so even more cosmetic industry professionals can discover the CosmoFactory. I'm Deanna Utrusky. Please join me again next Tuesday for a new episode of the CosmoFactory podcast.